The day my father stood up at Thanksgiving dinner and announced he was transitioning to live as a woman, my blood ran cold. Little did I know that the small leather envelope he slipped into my hands later that night would nearly destroy the love I shared with Ezekiel. All because I refused to face the truth about myself. The turkey was still steaming on the table when Dad cleared his throat and said it plainly. No dramatics, just quiet resolve in his voice as he looked around at Mom, my sister Sophia, my brother Marco, and me. I've lived as Robert for 55 years, but that's not who I am anymore. I'm starting the process to become Rebecca. I hope you can find it in your hearts to understand. The room went dead silent except for the clink of a fork Mom dropped. Sophia gasped. Marco muttered something under his breath about midlife crisis. And I just sat there frozen, my mind spinning so fast I could barely breathe. Dad had always been the rock of our Chicago family. The guy who coached my little league teams, fixed every leaky faucet, and never missed a Sunday mass. Now he was telling us he was going to be Rebecca, and all I could think about was how this changed everything I thought I knew about being a man in this family. After dinner, when the others had scattered to the living room in stunned clusters, Dad pulled me aside in the hallway and pressed the envelope into my palm. This is for you, Josue. Open it when you're ready. It's my way of saying I see you, son, more than you know. His eyes were kind, not the stern ones I grew up with, and for a second I almost asked what he meant. But I didn't. I shoved it in my jacket pocket and drove back to the apartment I shared with Ezekiel in Lincoln Park. The city lights blurring through tears I refused to let fall. Ezekiel was waiting up, his dark curls messy from grading papers, that easy smile lighting his face the moment I walked in. Rough night, babe? He asked, pulling me into a hug that usually melted every worry away. Tonight it felt like a cage. I pulled back too fast, mumbling something about family drama, and headed straight for the bedroom without explaining. How could I? Ezekiel had been out since college, proud and open, the architect who designed community centers for queer youth on the weekends. I was still the guy who told my family we were just roommates, the graphic designer who smiled through every "when are you getting a girlfriend" question at holidays. Dad's announcement cracked something open inside me, and the fear that spilled out made me push Ezekiel away even as he tried to comfort me. The next morning I stared at the unopened envelope on the kitchen counter while Ezekiel made coffee. Whatever it is, you don't have to carry it alone, he said softly, but I snapped at him. Something about not everyone having the luxury of being out and proud. He flinched like I'd slapped him, and the silence that followed was heavier than any argument we'd ever had. I grabbed the envelope and stuffed it in a drawer, telling myself I'd deal with it later. But later never came easy. Work at the design firm was a blur of deadlines and fake smiles, while at home Ezekiel gave me space I didn't deserve. By the end of the week, the tension had built into something ugly. I overheard him on the phone with his sister, saying he didn't know how much longer he could wait for me to choose us. That night I sat on the couch alone, the envelope burning a hole in my mind, and for the first time I wondered if Dad's truth was somehow tied to the secret I'd buried for years. I loved Ezekiel more than anything, but loving him meant admitting I was gay in a family that now felt like it was falling apart, and I wasn't sure I was strong enough to survive that. The envelope stayed sealed, a ticking bomb I pretended didn't exist while everything around me started to crack. Weeks blurred into a haze of avoidance and half-truths after Dad's announcement. He started living part-time as Rebecca, showing up to family brunch in soft blouses and letting his hair grow out, and every time I saw the changes I felt a fresh wave of panic. Mom was trying, God bless her, making an effort to use the new name and correcting Marco when he slipped up, but Sophia kept crying in the bathroom and Marco barely spoke to any of us. I threw myself into work, designing logos for local nonprofits until my eyes burned, but the real storm was at home with Ezekiel. He'd been patient at first, cooking my favorite pozole on Sundays and leaving little notes on the fridge, but patience has limits. One Tuesday evening I came home late to find him packing a weekend bag. I need air, Josue, he said, voice steady but eyes tired. You've been shutting me out since Thanksgiving, and I can't keep pretending it's fine. If your dad's news is making you question everything, including us, I need to know. His words hit like a freight train because he was right. Dad's courage had forced me to look at my own cowardice, and instead of feeling inspired, I felt exposed. I wanted to tell him the envelope was still unopened in the drawer, that I was terrified Dad somehow knew about us and was trying to fix me from the inside out, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I lashed out. Not everything is about you, Ezekiel. My family is falling apart and you're making it about our relationship. The hurt in his face was immediate, and he left without another word, the door clicking shut like a period at the end of a sentence I wasn't ready to finish. Alone in the apartment, I finally yanked the drawer open and stared at the envelope. My hands shook as I tore it open, expecting some preachy letter about traditional values or maybe a check for therapy. What I found was a handwritten note on yellow legal paper and a small bank slip. The note read, "Josue, I've known since you were 16, and I saw you looking at that boy from the soccer team the way I used to look at your mother. I never said anything because I was too busy hiding my own truth. This money is for you and whoever makes you happy. No conditions. Be braver than I was. Love, Dad or Rebecca." Now my knees gave out. Dad had known all along. He'd seen me with Ezekiel years ago at a company picnic and never breathed a word. The bank slip was a down payment large enough for a house in a good neighborhood, earmarked simply for Josue and his partner. I sat on the floor for hours, the letter crumpled in my fist, tears burning tracks down my cheeks. All this time I'd assumed Dad's announcement was a betrayal of everything he taught me about being a man. But it was the opposite, a gift of freedom I'd almost thrown away because I was too scared to accept it. When Ezekiel texted later saying he was staying at his sister's for a few days, I didn't reply. I needed to process the fact that my father had accepted the part of me I hated most before I could even admit it existed. The next morning I called in sick to work and drove to the park by the lake where Ezekiel and I had our first real date, sitting on the same bench watching the water churn gray under a winter sky. The misunderstanding had already cost me days with the man I loved, and I realized too late that destroying that letter in my anger would have been the real betrayal, not Dad's transition, not my sexuality, but my refusal to see the love that had been there all along. The park bench felt colder than I remembered, wind whipping off Lake Michigan and cutting through my coat as I replayed every moment with Ezekiel in my head. 2 years of stolen weekends, quiet I love yous whispered in the dark, and me always pulling back just enough to keep the secret safe. Dad's letter sat heavy in my pocket now, a lifeline I'd nearly severed in my panic. I pulled out my phone and typed a message to Ezekiel. I opened the envelope. "We need to talk. Please come home." His reply came faster than I expected. "On my way. Love you." Those 2 words cracked the dam I'd built, and by the time he walked through the apartment door that evening I was a mess of apologies and explanations. I told him everything, the letter, Dad's words, the way his transition had mirrored my own hidden fears. Ezekiel listened without interrupting, his hand steady on my knee, and when I finished he pulled me close. "I was scared you were ashamed of us," he admitted, voice thick. "But this changes things, Josue. Your dad gave us a future. Now it's up to you whether we take it." We spent the weekend talking like we hadn't in months, planning what the house could look like, where we'd put the bookshelves for his architecture texts and my drawing tablets. But real life doesn't pause for healing. Monday brought a call from Mom asking me to come to dinner because Rebecca wanted to talk to the whole family. I drove over with Ezekiel's hand in mine for the first time in public, nerves jangling the whole way. The house smelled like Mom's arroz con pollo, but the atmosphere was thick with uncertainty. Rebecca sat at the head of the table now, makeup subtle but present, and when she spoke her voice was softer yet somehow stronger. "I know this has been hard on all of you, but hiding who I am nearly killed me inside. I don't expect instant acceptance, but I hope we can try." Marco crossed his arms. Sophia wiped her eyes, but I found myself nodding. The letter had shifted something in me, a willingness to see past the fear. Later, helping Rebecca clear the table, I showed her the envelope. She smiled, tears glistening. "I was terrified you'd hate me for it, but I had to tell you the truth before the hormones changed everything else." We hugged for the first time in years, and in that moment the misunderstanding that had almost cost me my relationship with Ezekiel felt smaller. Back home I told Ezekiel about the dinner, and for the first time we talked openly about coming out to my family together. He was ready, had been for months, but he didn't push. "When you're ready, I'm here," he said, kissing my forehead. Work the next day brought its own test. A client making offhand comments about those people in the news talking about gender stuff, and I felt the old panic rise. But I thought of Dad, of Rebecca, of the letter, and I spoke up calmly, defending the right to live authentically. The client backed off, and I realized standing up for my father was practice for standing up for myself. Ezekiel and I started looking at houses online that weekend, laughing over floor plans and arguing about backyard space. But underneath the joy was the growing pressure of the secret, still between me and my family. One wrong step and everything could unravel again, but for the first time I felt like I might be strong enough to hold it together. Spring arrived in Chicago with sudden warmth that melted the last dirty snow piles, and with it came the first real test of my new resolve. Ezekiel and I had narrowed our house search to 3 properties, each one feeling like a promise of the life Dad's gift had made possible. But family dinners remained minefields. Rebecca was fully out now, attending church in dresses that made Marco visibly uncomfortable, and Sophia had started calling her Mom in private but slipped at gatherings. I kept waiting for the right moment to tell them about Ezekiel, rehearsing speeches in the shower until the water ran cold. Then one Saturday afternoon everything collided. We were at a family barbecue in the backyard, Rebecca flipping burgers in an apron that read "New Chapter, Same Love," when Marco cornered me by the cooler. "You've been different since Rebecca came out," he said, beer in hand. "Hanging around that roommate of yours a lot. You're not, like that, are you?" The question landed like a punch, and before I could stop myself I snapped, "What if I am? Would that be so terrible after everything we've been through?" The words hung in the air, and Marco's face went white. Rebecca overheard and stepped in gently, but the damage was done. Sophia started crying again. Mom looked torn, and I felt the familiar shame flood back. I drove home in silence, Ezekiel beside me quiet until we pulled into the parking lot. "You almost said it," he said softly. "But you didn't. And now your brother thinks I'm the reason you're distant." The misunderstanding between us flared again, not because he was wrong, but because I still hadn't fully claimed my truth. That night I pulled the letter out again and read it aloud to him, voice cracking on the part about being braver than Dad had been. Ezekiel took my hands. "I love you, Josue, but I can't keep being your secret forever. Your dad risked everything for honesty. Maybe it's time we did too." The argument that followed was raw, accusations flying about timing and fear and what the family would think. I accused him of not understanding Latino family expectations. He accused me of using Dad's transition as an excuse to stay hidden. In the heat of it, I grabbed the envelope and for one terrifying second held it over the sink, ready to tear it to shreds along with the future it represented. Ezekiel's quiet "don't" stopped me. We went to bed without resolving anything, backs turned, the weight of almost destroying the gift pressing down harder than ever. The next morning I woke to find Ezekiel gone for an early run, and I sat at the kitchen table staring at the crumpled letter. Dad had sacrificed his entire identity for truth, and here I was nearly sacrificing the best thing in my life because I was still afraid. I called Rebecca that afternoon and asked if we could meet alone. She suggested the same park by the lake, and when I arrived she was already there on the bench, looking peaceful in the sunlight. I told her everything, the letter's impact, the fight with Ezekiel, the near destruction of her gift. She listened, then said simply, "I almost destroyed my own life by hiding, son. Don't make my mistake." Her words unlocked something, and when I got home Ezekiel was waiting with takeout and open arms. We talked until dawn, planning a small family gathering where I would finally introduce him properly. The misunderstanding had brought us to the edge, but the letter, the gift I'd almost lost, reminded me that love without honesty wasn't love at all. Work the following week felt lighter, and I even told a coworker about my partner without flinching. Small steps, but each one built on the courage Dad had given me. Summer heat settled over Chicago like a blanket, and with it came the family gathering I'd both dreaded and craved. We hosted it at the apartment, Ezekiel and I cooking together in the tiny kitchen while Rebecca brought her famous tres leches cake. Marco arrived tense, Sophia with her new boyfriend in tow, Mom smiling but watchful. When everyone had plates, I stood up, heart hammering, and said the words I'd practiced for months. This is Ezekiel, my boyfriend. We've been together for 2 years, and Dad Rebecca gave us the down payment for a house because she wanted us to have the future she didn't get to live openly. The silence lasted maybe 10 seconds before Rebecca started clapping, tears in her eyes. Mom hugged me next, whispering that she'd suspected for years. Sophia smiled through fresh tears, and even Marco, after a long pause, shook Ezekiel's hand and muttered, "If he makes you happy, that's what matters." The relief was so profound I nearly collapsed. Ezekiel squeezed my hand under the table, his smile brighter than the city lights outside. But growth isn't linear. 2 weeks later, a work colleague who'd overheard my coming-out conversation started spreading rumors around the office. Subtle at first, but damaging enough that a big client pulled out citing company values. I came home furious, ready to quit on the spot, and Ezekiel talked me down with the same patience that had carried us through the worst months. "Your dad faced worse and still chose truth," he reminded me. "We face it together now." We spent the evening researching new opportunities, and by the end of the week I'd lined up interviews at a progressive design firm downtown. The misunderstanding with my family had healed, but society's judgment was a new battle, one that tested the strength the letter had given me. Rebecca called often now, sharing updates on her hormone journey and asking about house hunting, her voice full of pride that made me realize how close I'd come to losing this connection too. One humid August night, Ezekiel and I drove out to the first house we'd seriously considered, a modest 3-bedroom with a backyard big enough for weekend barbecues. Standing on the porch as the realtor gave us space, he turned to me and said, "We almost lost this because you almost destroyed that envelope." But we didn't. I kissed him right there under the porch light, no longer caring who might see. The next day we made an offer, and when it was accepted, Rebecca insisted on coming over with champagne. Watching her laugh with Ezekiel over ridiculous paint color names, I felt the last pieces of my old fear dissolve. The gift hadn't just been money or words. It had been permission to live fully, and I'd nearly thrown it away in my confusion. Work stress eased when the new firm offered me a position, and family dinners became easier, Rebecca's presence now a source of strength rather than shock. Ezekiel and I started planning the move, packing boxes while talking about the future we'd almost lost. Every late-night conversation, every shared laugh, felt like proof that understanding my father's truth had finally let me claim my own. Fall leaves turned the Chicago streets gold and crimson as Ezekiel and I closed on the house, the keys heavy and real in my palm. Moving day was chaos of boxes and laughter, Rebecca directing traffic like she'd been part of our lives forever, Mom bringing food, Sophia and Marco helping carry furniture. The envelope's bank slip had made it possible, but the real gift was the courage it had forced me to find. That evening, sitting on the back porch with Ezekiel while the others cleaned up inside, I pulled the worn letter from my pocket one last time. "I almost burned this," I admitted, because I didn't understand that Dad's change was the same fight I was having inside. Ezekiel leaned his head on my shoulder. "But you didn't. And now look at us." Rebecca joined us later, hugging us both and whispering that she was proud of the men we'd become. The family that had fractured at Thanksgiving dinner was slowly mending, not perfectly, but with honesty that felt like healing. Work at the new firm was thriving, my designs now carrying a confidence I'd never had before, and Ezekiel's students adored the cool architect uncle who showed up for career day. Life wasn't without challenges. Marco still stumbled over pronouns sometimes and clients occasionally raised eyebrows. But each hurdle felt manageable because I wasn't facing it alone. Months later, on a crisp October evening, we hosted our first big family barbecue in the new backyard. Rebecca wore a bright scarf that fluttered in the breeze, laughing at Marco's terrible grilling attempts, while Sophia and Mom swapped recipes. Ezekiel grilled vegetables beside me, our shoulders brushing in that easy way that said everything without words. I looked around at the people I loved most and realized the journey from Dad's shocking announcement to this moment had been worth every tear, every misunderstanding, every moment I'd almost given up. The gift I'd nearly destroyed had saved more than a house. It had saved me. As the sun set and everyone raised glasses to new beginnings, I felt a peace I'd never known. Ezekiel caught my eye across the yard and smiled, the same smile that had carried me through the darkest days, and I knew we'd made it. The emotional journey that began with fear had ended in acceptance, not just of my father but of myself and the man I loved. Life in America for two gay men building a future wasn't always easy, but it was ours, built on truth and the courage to keep choosing love. True or false? Understanding our parents' truths is always the only way to fully accept our own.